The ban of repeatedly living bodies. No matter what body you take, it will prove untrustworthy. We're reading from page number 434. From Nagarjuna's letter, gain the enormous bliss and pleasure of the gold of the god realms, gain the bliss free of attachment of Brahma himself, and later you will feel the fires of the hell without respite, where the suffering is unbroken and constant. When you were the sun or moon gods, the light from your bodies shone on all the worlds. Later, you went to pitch-black darkness, where you could not even see your own outstretched hands. In other words, in the past you had numberless rebirths in the bodies of Brahma and Indra and so on, yet derived no benefit at all. Later you were born in the hell without respite and so forth, or as a slave, etc. From time to time you were born as sun or moon gods, and the light from your body illuminated the four continents. Then you died, left that rebirth, and were born in the dark depths of the oceans between continents, where you could not even see the movements of your limbs. There are no celestial or human riches that you can claim not to have experienced in the past, but none of these riches proved trustworthy. You have already been born in the god realms and sat on thrones encrusted with diamonds and the like. Even your house has been made entirely of precious substances. You have enjoyed such things many times, but now all you sit on are leather cushions. Even though you were even born as an Indra, you then became a beggar. Your rebirths as Indra were of no help to you. In the high rebirths, you spend much time in pleasure, caressing the breasts and ways of women, and then in hell you felt the unbearable touch of the instruments of torture that crushed, cut, and tore you. In other words, you have already been born in the god realms, and for a long time experienced pleasure with goddesses there. Then you left that life, were reborn in hell, surrounded by the terrifying hell gods, and experienced suffering. You drank and drank the celestial ambrosia of immortality. Then you left at rebirth and had to drink the molten metal of the hells. You have already been made universal emperors, had power over many hundreds of thousands of human households, had the 7 signs of regal power at your disposal, and so forth. Now you have nothing to show for it, no trace of benefit. As I have already told you, the drawback is that your attachment to objects of the senses increased, leaving you discontented. You then accumulated sins for the sake of those things and went from lower realm to lower realm. My own guru, my refuge and protector, told me this story. Once a Lama was dying and someone asked him if he had any last thing to say. The Lama repeated over and over again, the things in samsara have no essence. No matter what wealth or riches we have, we will derive no essence from them, just as in the past. When we were reborn as universal emperors, all this world's wealth could not compare with the value of one of our shoes. We had the experience of wearing many such clothes, and it did not benefit us. Page number 436. When a king and a beggar traveled the perils of the bardo, their equals, treated neither better nor worse. Geshe Changawa said, O Lord Dunba, since beginningless time, no matter what kind of body we received, we have not experienced Mahayana Dharma practice as of now. Therefore, we must work hard. In other words, be careful. The fourth suffering, the ban of being conceived and born over and over again. From Nagarjuna's letter, if you counted all your mothers with juniper berry-sized balls of earth, the earth would not be enough. Instead of ridding yourself of sorrow, you have time and again in hell drunk so much boiling and molten brass, even the water in the oceans would not equal it. That is, you have already been born in hell and drunk more molten brass than there is water in the great oceans. And if you do not break the continuity of your rebirths into samsara, you will have to drink even more. When you were dogs and pigs, the amount of all the filth you ate would be much greater than Meru, the king of mountains. You have already been dogs and pigs and have eaten more filth than Mount Meru, and if you do not break away from samsara, you will have to eat even more. So many tears have you shed in samsara's realms when separated from your dearest friends, that the teardrops from your eyes would overflow the basins of the oceans. You have already been separated from parents, children, brothers, and so on, and shed more tears than the oceans, and if you do not break away from samsara, you will cry still more. You have already been involved in fighting, and the pile of your heads cut off by animals would be higher than Mount Meru. And if you do not break the continuity of your rebirths into samsara, you can be sure even more in future will be cut off. In other words, we have been born as muddy earthworms and have already eaten so much filthy earth and manure that the quantity would not fit into the great ocean basins. But if we do not free ourselves from samsara, we will have to eat even more. In other words, you have already continuously received bodies in samsara and drunk more milk at your mother's breast than the 4 great oceans. Yet, if you cannot stop being reborn into samsara, you will have to drink even more. Page number 438, reading from the 3rd para. The band of moving from high to low over and over again, from the transmission of Vinaya, all collections end up running out, the high end up falling, meeting ends up in separation, living ends in death. This speaks of the 4 ends of a conditioned phenomena. Collections of wealth and property end up running out. A fall ends our high position. The end of coming together is being separated, and death is the end of a rebirth. No matter what you acquire of samsara's affluence, not one bit of it will be exempt from decay or will not end. As Geshe Sangpuba said, in samsara one must hold a great many things, but do not pin your hopes on them, you will decline. Furthermore, we have made a great effort to build a house and amass wealth, but we may well not see them through to completion. Enemies could steal them, or we may die. Where lamas and disciples gather here today are sure to be separated after only a few years' time. As Kyesang Gyatso, the 7th Dalai Lama, said, in but a short while, the high become downtrodden slaves, and from Nagarjuna's letter, you may be Indra, to whom the world makes offerings, but still through karma's power you will fall to the ground. You may be a universal emperor, but in the cycles of samsara you will become a slave. In other words, this is what happens to the high, Brahma, Indra, and the like. As for the lowly, any worldly gains, status, or good fortune are without essence. Kundang Rinpoche said, as you climb farther and farther up, that dead tree called name and fame, it will bend and break, alas. Best stay only halfway up. In other words, not only are past and future lives untrustworthy, but so also is this one. There are kings who have to stay in prison and so forth. One Sangye Gyatso, a regent of Tibet, instituted many reforms in the central government. He was a rich and powerful man and one of the greatest scholars as well. But in the end, he incurred the displeasure of Lhasang Khan and was beheaded. His silver head was left for days in the middle of Tisam Bridge at Tuelung, and no one dare claim it. His wife and sons had to wander the ends of the earth as beggars. Lhasang Khan himself was later killed when Dzogchen armies invaded. The ban of having no companion. In the beginning, when you were born from your mother's womb, you were born alone. In midlife, when you get sick, for example, only you can experience it. In the end, when you die, you go through death alone like a hair drawn out of a butter pat. There is no one to help you. Engaging in the Disa Bodhisattva says, when born, you are born alone. When die, you are just as alone. What can your meddlesome friends do if they won't take on another share of suffering? Great Jitsongkhapa said, the splendors of existence are untrustworthy. Know their drawbacks. In other words, no matter what you obtain of the splendors and happiness of samsara, these are untrustworthy, and not one samsaric friend is reliable in the long run. Reading from page 440. Thinking about samsara's specific sufferings. Thinking about the sufferings of the lower realms, you have already thought about the first of these in the small scope section, and it will revolt you as alcohol revolts someone with a hangover. Thinking about sufferings of the upper realms, the first one is thinking about human sufferings, and there are 7 subheadings. If the sufferings of the lower realms are as I described above, you might think, aren't the sufferings of gods and humans small? But you are born in samsara. Even gaining a high rebirth is nothing but suffering. We have been reborn as humans, but if we ignore the fact that we can derive great benefit through practicing dharma, we will suffer as enormously as the rest. Owing to the trauma of being born from a womb, we have completely forgotten about the way we have already undergone the sufferings of birth. If we manage to take a human rebirth again, we must again experience all the sufferings of birth, although we do not remember them now. After you enter the mother's womb and until you are born in the outside world, you have each of the sufferings associated with both the 5 stages of development in the womb and the periods when each part of the body develops. First, when your consciousness is placed in the center of your parents' drops of blood and sperm, your body is only like a speck of yogurt. And when your consciousness enters it, the suffering is like being boiled in a giant hell cauldron. When the head and swellings for the limbs appear, you suffer as if you were being stretched out on the rack. Each limb adds only more suffering. When your mother drinks something hot, when she moves, sleeps and so on, you suffer as if you were being boiled in a hot spring, carried on by the wind or crushed under a huge mountain. As Chandra Gomin's letter to a disciple says, enclosed naked in a most intolerable stench, you live enveloped in pitch blackness. After entering this hellish place, the womb, you must endure great suffering with your body all hunched up. In other words, imagine you are placed in an iron pot filled with various kinds of food and the lid is put on. There is no way you could stay in it even for a day, yet you have had to stay in your mother's womb in its smelly filth and its black darkness for 9 months, 10 days. You then develop 5 attitudes concerning the nose-eating aspects of the womb's interior that makes you want to emerge. Yet even as you are being pushed through the correct, as the letter to a disciple says, you are gradually squeezed as hard as one crushes sesame, then someone you are born. In other words, the suffering is like having your body squeezed in a vice. When you emerge, your skin is like raw flake cowhide, and when you are placed on a cushion, no matter how soft, it is like being thrown on a bramble patch. When you feel an outside wind, it is like being penetrated by a sword. When your mother takes you in her arms and carries you, it is like a sparrow being carried off by a hawk. These things terrify you. When you meditate on your birth from the womb, it should not be like goggling at someone else at an entertainment. You should meditate to develop insight into how you yourself are certain to have such a birth again and into what it would be like. You should think about the sufferings mentioned in the Sutra for Nanda on entering the womb. And Papamokkha Rinpoche told how this would be difficult to endure and so on. Next is the suffering of aging. From the Great Play Sutra, age makes a beautiful body ugly. Age takes radiance, age takes strength, age takes happiness, age humiliates, age kills, and age robs the complexion. In other words, the suffering of aging are one's handsome body deteriorates, one's strength declines, one's faculties decline, one's enjoyment of objects of the senses declines, one's lifespan declines, and so on. Your sense faculties, wisdom, etc. gradually dim, your body gets bent like a bow, your complexion declines, it is difficult for you to sit down and get up. Your hair whitens, you have many wrinkles, you become as ugly as one already departed, as Milarepa said. 1, you will get up like someone tethered to a stake. 2, you will walk as if stalking birds. 3, you will sit like a crumbling clod of earth. When the time comes for you, grandmother, to have all three, the decay of body, that marriage will depress you. 1. Outside your skin creases into many wrinkles. 2. Inside your flesh and blood thin out so bones protrude. 3. Between these you are dull, stupid, deaf, blind, and senile. When the time comes for you, grandmother, to have all three, you will look ugly, wrinkled, and wrathful. All these things are defects of being in samsara. Kadamba Geshe Kamapa said, how good that old age comes bit by bit. It will be impossible to take if it came on all at once. In other words, if a healthy young man in his prime went to sleep tonight and woke up tomorrow with unclear faculties, with a bent and ancient body, and so on, it would be impossible for him to bear. You must practice Dharma now, before your faculties, wisdom and body decline. Later, when the sufferings of old age dominate you and you are about to leave your human body, your physical condition will have changed. Your faculties will have declined and you will not even be able to get up or sit down. How could you practice Dharma then? Konoram Rinpoche Tempedrume said, it is that if the old receive initiation water on their heads, their hair is conch shell white, but not because it's pure or filth. It has been spat on by the Lord of Death and has taken a frosty look. Wrinkles crisscross their foreheads, that is not from baby fat. Time's messengers met these tally marks to count the many years gone from their lives. Drops of mucus dribble from their noses. These do not look like necklaces of pearls. Their youth, their carefree times are glaciers melting in the sun. Reading from page 444. Their rows of teeth have fallen out, but no replacement teeth await to grow. They've eaten all this life's food, so their cutlery has been confiscated. Their drawn faces and poor color are not because they are wearing monkey masks. Their loan of youth has been cold, and now their true colors show. Their heads are nodding, but not because they are snickering at others. Yama prods them with its club's tip, and they can't help shaking their heads. Their faces look down, bent toward the road, but they were not searching for lost needles. Their memory and jewel of youth have split on the ground, hence the posture. They use all four limbs when they get up, but not because they pretend they were cows. Their legs cannot support their bodies, so their hands have to assist. They sit down with a thud, but not because they are furious with a friend. The rope of health and sling of mental happiness are now severed. When they walk, they sway and lurch, but not because they are walking like a lot. They are under a great burden from their age, and the weight has upset their sense of balance. Their hands clutch at things and tremble, but they are not scooping up some gambling winds. They were afraid that Yama will steal everything in their reach. Their eating very little food and drink is not because they are stingy with their meals. The fire in their bellies have declined, so old people fear they may faint. They wear only thin, light clothes, but don't so dress to go out dancing. They have lost their inner body strength, and even clothes have become a burden. They wheeze and puff for breath, but are not blowing mantras. Like a lama, the gurgling sounds they are making when they breathe foretells their disappearance into thin air. Everything that they do isn't just to act like fool. The evil spirit of old age has captured them, and they aren't free to do as they would wish. They forget to do all their work, but not because they are shallow or don't care. Their faculties have declined, dimming their memories and mind. In other words, these wrinkles and white hairs are omens that they will be killed by karmayama, and there are yet more sufferings, mental anguish from the fear of death, and so forth. The next is the suffering of illness. From the Great Play Sutra, in the dead of winter, great winds and falls of snow rob grass, tree, forests, and shrubs of brilliance. Sickness likewise robs beings of their brilliance, and their bodies, strength, and faculties decline. Pavang Rinpoche then told how the young prince Siddhartha achieved liberation through his meditation after seeing a sick man, an old man, a dead man, and so on. The suffering of death. The Great Bliss Sutra tells us time makes for death, living and living in death. Forever you are separated from dear and pleasant people, they will not come back. There will be no reunion, how like falling leaves or the flow of a river. In other words, you will be separated from beauty and from affluence, from your property, relatives, retinue, and your body. When you actually die, you experience fierce suffering and mental anguish. When it is time for you to die, you cannot prevent it, as the instruction given to a King Sutra tells us. I have already discussed this in the section on remembering death. Reading from page 447. The suffering of being separated from the beautiful. You will be separated from your guru, disciples, relatives, friends, parents, and dear ones, the cherished people from whom you cannot bear separation for even the time it takes to drink a bowl of tea, and from your position, power, wealth, possessions, and affluence. Some ardent people even have such offerings as having to be without their ethics. The suffering of meeting with the ugly. By ugly we mean unpleasant, meet with your enemies, and you get beaten or robbed, meet with diseases or evil spirits, and you undergo torments, illness, or insanity. There are an infinite number of sufferings, meeting with lawsuits, punishment by the king, thieves, and the like. If some unfortunate circumstance arises and you suffer great mental and bodily fatigue while still in the middle of your duties, even this fault is due by nature to your still being in samsara. For example, when a donkey has to carry a heavy load that makes sores on its back, it is by virtue of his own karma. If it were impossible, it would not happen. Kishipotawa wrote, so long as we are born in any of the 6 types, we will suffer from heat, death, and so on. Who is to get sick, and who is to die, dies. These are not just random injustice, they are characteristic of and in the nature of samsara. For as long as we remain in samsara, we have not transcended the samsaric state. We must be moved to renounce these things and so abandon rebirth. For that, we must abandon their causes. In other words, if we do not wish to undergo the suffering of samsara, we must use the means to liberate from them. Thinking about the suffering of seeking the things we desire but not finding them. Reading from page 448. This is suffering from heat and cold, or from ignoring the heat, cold, fatigue, fear, and so forth that go along with earning a living. It is like example of asking something important of an official. First, your hopes of getting what you want tire and trouble you. Then you suffer when you do not attain your aims. Some may think that landowners are happy because they possess the causes of affluence, but they have not transcended suffering either. Farmers have to get up early in the morning at the crack of dawn for their work. During the day they are burned by the sun and tormented by the wind in the midst of dust. Once the seeds have been planted, the grain must be brought in, but until the grain is safely in the storage vessels, farmers worry that frost, hail, blight, and drought may come. Even if they prepare the ground, they may not get any crops. These worries continually cause them to suffer. You may think traders are happier than farmers, but traders suffer too. Reading from page 450. Thinking about the sufferings of demigods. You may think, still, if I am reborn as a demigod, won't I have some happiness? But even in this rebirth, you experience only suffering. From Nagarjuna's letter, the demigods by nature have great mental suffering, for they hate the glory of the gods. Though they are discerning, they will not see the truth, for this migration is obscured. The demigods are located on the part of Mount Meru that lies under the ocean. Therefore, cities bright, moon-gallant, noble place, and immutable. These four levels are the same distance apart as gods. The demigods cannot generally compete with the gods except in a few things where they are similar, and the gods still the beautiful demigods women. The gods have greater riches, for example, the ambrosia of immortality, and therefore the demigods are forever tormented by the fires of suffering of enormous jealousy. If we get so unhappy when we are jealous of the petty affluence of our enemies, need I say how unbearable the great affluence of the god must be for the demigods? When the demigods can no longer stand their sickening jealousy, they go to war. Aravana, the god's great elephant, holds rock at them with his trunk. The demigods throw weapons, but the gods die only when their necks are severed. The demigods may die when a weapon hits any part of their body, so they are always defeated, and at no time do they win. We are terrified when two armies of similar strength fight in the human realms, but are the demigods afraid when they must wage such war against the gods? They are absolutely terrified. Demigods' armies must wage these wars continuously till they die, as so they suffer. The demigod women back home are also tormented by suffering, for they can witness everything in the service of Lake Adarsha, the defeat of the demigod armies, the deaths of their companions, and so on. Though the demigods have wisdom, their rebirth is so willed by karma that in that birth they are not fortunate enough to see the truth. Next is thinking about the sufferings of the gods. In that case, you may ask, are the so-called gods happy? No, the desire realm gods also experience suffering from falling when they live that rebirth, from being intimidated, and from being maimed, killed, and banished. The first of this is as follows. Nagarjuna's letter says, their body color becomes ugly, their thrones do not please them, their flower garlands fade, their clothes pick up stains, and their bodies sweat for the first time. These are 5 omens of death, signals departure from paradise. When this happens to God in the celestial realms, they are like omens of death, proclaiming that even people beyond the earth will die. In other words, there are 5 signs of distant death and 5 signs of approaching death, and the gods suffer when these 10 omens appear. The luster of their body fades, they refuse to sit on their thrones, the flowers they wear fade, their clothes pick up stains, they sweat, and so on. Their bodies give up less light, water adheres to their bodies when they wash, the jewelry on their bodies give off an unpleasant sound, their eyes blink, and they keep to one place. When these 10 suns appear, they will in some forsaken place, breathing like fish out of water. Gods undergo this suffering for 7 of their days. In the realm of 4 Maharajas of the cardinal directions, for example, this lasts for 350 human years. Reading from page 455. Kyabje Pabunga Rinpoche then brought the discussion of suffering to a close by teaching the 3 types of suffering. We in samsara have such thoughts as I'm happy, but these thoughts are really suffering in their very nature. Our thoughts of I'm indifferent are in their very nature suffering. When we pour cold water on a burn, we seem temporarily happy. All our contaminated happy feelings eventually change to suffering, and thus are the suffering of change. Not only these contaminated happy feelings, but all their concomitant primary minds and mental factors, and any contaminated object that serves to develop, all are suffering of change. When you first receive a burn, you are not actually tormented by heat, although the nature of burn is heat. This is only temporary. However, so long as nothing hot or cold to the touch like water, etc., comes into contact with the wound, likewise contaminated feelings of equanimity, together with their concomitant primary minds, mental factors, and their objects, are under the power of past karma and delusions. They are linked to the seeds of future suffering and delusion. They are also linked to the ever-present evil mental states, feelings of equanimity, and therefore the suffering that pervades conditioned phenomena. When hot water, say, comes into contact with the burn, you develop manifest sufferings from the sensation of heat. Suffering such as this is the worst suffering. These feelings of pain, contaminated feelings of suffering that torment mind and body, together with concomitant primary minds, mental factors, and object of these feelings, are the sufferings of suffering. When we feel I'm suffering, it is the suffering of suffering. Your notion of happiness is itself the suffering of change, a sign that it is not truly happiness, but only your notion of happiness is the fact that it goes on too long, your suffering will increase. Your suffering at first only drop below a threshold level, later it will rise above the threshold, and the intervening period is your notion of happiness. Suppose we are now sitting in the shade for too long, we feel cold, so we move out into the sun. We seem to feel happy for a while, but this is not happiness. If it were, it would be like suffering. The more we encounter, the more it will increase. If going out into the sun were happiness, no matter how long we sat there, our happiness must grow the more, not become unhappiness. This is not what happens. We suffer again a little later and have to go back into shade. Our suffering has gradually risen above its threshold, although this is not in fact obvious. Reading from page 457. The contaminated aggregates are a case of the suffering that pervades all conditioned phenomena. The creation of these aggregates causes one to become a vessel for all suffering. You experience the sufferings of the heat and cold of the hells because you have received the aggregates of a hell being. You experience the sufferings of a hungry ghost hunger and thirst because you have received the aggregates of a hungry ghost. When you create for yourself the body of an animal, a donkey say, you carry a load on your back, get whipped, and so on, because you have created for yourself the vessel in which to experience these sufferings. In short, even the unbearable pain of being pricked by a thorn happens because you are inflicted with a set of aggregates. Just as a man carrying a load of brambles on his neck back will never be without suffering until he put his load down, you will never be without any kind of suffering until you are free of the burden of contaminated suffering. Kyabje Pabong Rinpoche told of Srijata, the householder, and how Maudulyayana, Srijata's emperor, took him to the ocean shore to show him the bones, human corpse, and so on, from people's lives, and how Srijata was moved to develop renunciation. Reading from page 459, day 15. Kyabje Pabong Rinpoche quoted from the great Pandit Aryadeva, "You child, how could you not be afraid that you will be bound here, when there is no end at all to this ocean of suffering? After giving a short talk to set our motivations and naming the headings he had already covered, he revised the section, developing thought of yearning for liberation. He then taught how to pursue this practice. As in the preparatory rites, you should think about the sufferings of samsara while meditating that your divine guru sits above the crown of your head. Between meditation sessions, refer to sutras that teach the drawbacks of samsara. The sutras on having much remembrance and others. After such contemplations, the criterion of having developed renunciation is whatever you see samsara's happiness, power, riches, and so forth you think these are fraudulent things they are suffering. You may be moved to renounce such things when you suffer a few samsaric problems like punishment, degradation, and so on. But this is only a superficial renunciation, only a pale reflection. So long as you are born into samsara, its nature is nothing but pure suffering. If you want never again to undergo suffering, you must break the continuity of your rebates. You develop a yearning for liberation when you are weary of samsara and wish to gain some certainty, in other words, renunciation. Great Tsongkhapa said, after such meditations, when you do not long for the splendors of samsara for even a moment, when your thoughts day and night always yearn for liberation, you have developed renunciation. And when others construct fine thrones for me, show me deference, pay me respect, and so on, I think these are all impermanent, they're all suffering, and I'm uncontrollably moved to renunciation. I had this for some time. Reading from page 461. Ascertaining the nature of path leading to liberation. This is two subsections. So next we will read from Shamar Lam Rim. Shamar Lam Rim, the Tibetan text, page number 215. To repeat again, we do not have the English translation for this text. Second outline is the nature of the path to liberation. Has two subsections. The first is thinking about the order of the source of ignorance, the source of the ignorant as the source of suffering, and the truth of suffering, in order to understand the root of the samsara. And second is establishing the nature of the path to enlightenment, which is the fourth truth. And first, the presentation on how the afflicted emotions arises, and through it how the karmic actions resulted. And next is about dying. And Lama Tsongkhapa is presented in the commentary on Madhyamika Mula that the afflicted emotions that we spoke here in the highest Madhyamika school, Madhyamika Prasangika, has to be the mind grasping the true existent. And it is also stated in the Arya Devas 400 verses. One kind of afflicted emotions actually can co-join with the mind grasping true existence. And within the commentary on Chandakriti's middle way, supplement to the middle way, Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary on that text, there is a special phrase dedicating to a certain kind of afflicted emotions which has its object clearly manifested. And when we speak here about the evident or very subtle form of the afflicted emotions, I think when we speak about the evident, it may be referring to the afflicted emotions which are commonly presented in the two Madhyamika schools. So even though we need two substantial causes to reborn in samsara, the afflicted emotions and the karma, but among the two causes, afflicted emotions is considered as the prime, and it is also the root of all the other actions. And as for the motivated causes, ignorance is also the motivated causes to be reborn in the samsara. So the ignorance here again becomes very important, which is also the part of afflicted emotions. And the 8 and the 9 of the interdependent links, which are again the attachments or the desire, which when inflicted upon the karma, the continuity of the karma seeds, which are in latent form, again give rise of those latent forms into real karma, which again lead to another rebirth in the next and subsequent rebirths. So therefore, among the 12 interdependent links, the first 8 and 9, the three are actually afflicted emotions of attachment and ignorance. So therefore, and in the Abhisamaya Alamkara, we have a reference for the faith to the three jewels can be also a part of the afflicted emotions. So therefore, I think that sometimes the compassion and also the faith can be also contaminated in terms of afflicted faith and afflicted compassion. So to generate or to develop uncontaminated compassion and love, of course, first we need to understand about the reality of all the phenomena, the emptiness. And the mind grasping the phenomena as true existence, when we understood that mind, the nature, the main apprehendable object of that mind do not exist, then we will gain understanding about that. First, the interdependent nature of all the phenomena as the fact and the opposite, where the mind looks at the object as not inherent existence, as inherent existence is the opposite. And all the phenomenon appearances are inflected by the conceptual thoughts. So this explanation about the role of conceptual thoughts into creating the image before us will be touched later. So here when we refer to have great faith and devotion to one's master, then many a times the faith gets contaminated or related to impartial and also related to attachment. So we have to be very careful about one's faith. As long as your attachment increases towards that object, then of course the anger also increases. So therefore, one of the primary causes for the arisen of anger is attachment or the desire. So therefore, all the practitioners have to understood that the ignorance and the other delusions. I think many of you must have heard. I have a story to tell here. In Lhasa, in the previous Dalai Lama's time, I think we have 3 vehicles. And sometimes when they need some repairing, mechanical problems, there is one driver who used to treat that. He is a bald-head and he's quite short-tempered, but he's very obedient. And one day there was some problem and he was repairing something at at the underneath of the car. And as he was doing the repair work, and I thought his bolt had touched something, the below of the cages or something, and he was so angry, and he hit it again with his head to that object. And of course, the car has nothing to lose. His head will get hurt again and again. So when one gets anger, and when one is under the influence of anger, we do not understand the fact. So even though it is fact that he will suffer more. And nowadays all the wars and the troubles in the world, we see everybody do not realize that when someone acts in a haste, when one is in the influence of anger, when they actually do realize later that it will bring more harm to themselves, more loss to themselves. So when the afflicted emotions increase at that time, we lose our power to discriminate, to distinguish between what is the fact, what is right and what is wrong. So we lose our potential to draw distinction between right and wrong. And normally for all of us, when we are angry, we use bad speeches, and we also show bad faces to other people. But when the anger dies down, we feel ashamed to other people that you have done such a thing. And also when you are angry towards some people, so the anger, the intensity of the anger actually influence and cover the wisdom within us, which distinguish between right and wrong. And this is something the scientists tell us today. If we get anger again and again and get frightened, so once one get angry, then we get frightened. If this too happens very often, the immune system in our body will declines. The medical practitioners, those in the field of medicine, tells us this fact. If one has more compassion and more warm-hearted, and there is no fear, and if there is no fear, then there is no anger. So in this way, the immune system in one's body increase and become more powerful. And I used to tell that we do not need to discuss about next and subsequent life. Even in this life, the anger and aversion is even very bad for one's body and one's life, and also bad for one's long life, and also lessens one's friend, and bad for society. So the anger is the cause of all the problems. This is something which is evident in our own society, and something which we cannot see.
So due to grasping at the self of a personal self, then that serves as an empowering condition. So let us say the prayer for tea. So to all the listeners, there's an important announcement to make. Please, when you come to the teachings, do not bring your mobile phones, and you're allowed to bring your iPad or tablets, but not mobile phones. You must leave your mobile phones in your rooms, wherever you're staying. And it's creating problems for the people who are responsible for checking you. Because they have no place to keep your mobiles, and it's always this creates tension between them and the audience, the participants of this teaching. So please do not bring your mobile phones. So His Holiness is saying that is it any use to close that the big gate in front, because many people are actually looking through the gate. So So because of that, you have this pride or arrogance, observing one's own, the good qualities of your body and so forth. So the pride serves as an obstacle to develop one's path or realizations of the path, and also causes you in the next lives to be born as in the lower realms of existence, and also as servants and so forth. So if you actually feel that you know something, then you will not put effort to learn more. And with regard to ignorance, so it is nuisance of not knowing the nature of the Four Noble Truths, the law of causality, the definitions of or the characteristics of the three jewels. So with regard to this ignorance, there is the worst is the worst kind of ignorance which causes us more problems is the distorted view. So there are many different types of this kind of fundamental ignorance has many different types. So as long as you become, as long as you have not attained Buddhahood, you'll still have ignorance. So once you have overcome all ignorance, then you will be a Buddha. And with regard to doubt, it is the state of mind which is two-pronged with regard to thinking in whether the teachings of the Four Noble Truths and so forth are true, or whether they really do exist or not, or true or not. And so the doubting about doubting the three jewels and about the three jewels and the law of causality serves as an obstacle for higher rebirth. And doubting about the Four Noble Truths is an obstacle to liberation. And so from the insight section down, the Jerim Rinpoche, in his great treatise of the Lam Rim, deals with the view of the correct view from the point of view of Madhyamaka system of philosophy. Until that point, he goes through the other systems of philosophy. So if you doubt about the law of causality, the three jewels, and the Four Noble Truths, this serves as a basis for you not to engage in the practices of the virtuous practices, which serves as the means for higher and low, the higher rebirths as well as liberation. And then with regard to the view of transitory collection or aggregates, this view observes as its object the contaminated or psychophysical aggregates and feels this me and mine. And so it is an afflicted intelligence which grasps at self and mindness. And then with regard to the wrong view, so this, first of all, this grasping at it, the transitory collection, the view of transitory aggregates, serves as the basis for all kinds of distorted views. And also, it is asserted or accepted as the basis for all other afflictive emotions. And the view of the extremes, extreme view is considering with regard to the self, which is observed by this view of transitory collection, thinking that it is permanent, unchanging, and also we need to differentiate between within the selfless as the grasp. With regard to the grasping at the self, we need to differentiate between the gross and the subtle ways of grasping at the self. And so this kind of view, the extreme view of extremes, serve as called. What happens due to this is that we. It goes against the middle path, which is free from the two extremes of permanence and annihilation. And therefore, it serves as an obstacle to go beyond the samsara, out of samsara. And then this grasping or the view, holding on to the supremacy of oneself, one's view. It is also an afflictive intelligence which observes the psychophysical aggregates of the person who this view holds that one psychophysical aggregates as observing the psychophysical aggregates and feels that I am supreme, and this is in turn based on the view of transitory collection and also extreme view and wrong views. And so with regards to the afflictive emotions are purified into it's their nature, has to be understood from within the understanding that of a highest yoga tantric practice of being able to actualize the clear light. And so with regards to the next point it touches on is the wrong view. So with regard to wrong view, there are two types, as one was commenting. An exaggerated form which sees something as being there where it is not, and then there's also a denigrating wrong view. And so with regards to past and future lives and law of causality and the three jewels, when you think that they do not exist, it is a denigrating form of the wrong view. Whereas, and then considering the Ishvara and the primal factor and so forth as the cause of beings is also afflictive emotions. So it is very clear that all our problems that we as human beings have created are because of our negative emotions. And so we create all kinds of problems due to our negative emotions, such as attachment and anger, hatred. And as antidotes to them, we could practice love and also compassion and so forth. And so if we could practice them, then there would be less problem in the world. As I said some other day, that the modern education system is primarily focused on material development and not on primarily focused on developing our mind. And therefore, with regard to this practice, we could take the psychology that we find in Buddhist literature so that we could help, we could just take it out of the context of the dharma or religion and use it in a secular way. And so, even with regard to anger, there could be anger which is compassionately motivated. And so if we could really know the different types of emotions, it would be helpful. So we do not need to think only about a future life, but even in this life, we can relate these experiences and the explanations of psychology and which could help our family and ourselves as well. And so with regard to now next point, which is how the process of development of these negative emotions, which is the second outline that was given in the beginning of this section, which is the establishing the nature of the path leading to liberation. So the main enemy, the true enemy is within ourselves, these negative emotions. We should not point to the external enemies, these negative emotions. If we know how these negative emotions are and in short term as well as long term, they cause problems to oneself and others. And then when you know that, you will be aware of how to overcome them. And could be a good used as a subject of for giving a good education on how to develop our mind in morality, in terms of morality. And so these days, many people are talking about teaching ethics in education systems. In America, they talk about it, and also in Europe as well as in India, people talk about it. And also in regarding China, because of focusing and obsessing with material development alone, then although they call themselves socialists, but there are so many people who have become, they're bourgeoisies and lost all sense of morality. So this is lack of this education of morality and ethics. So by understanding the faults of the negative emotions and also the antidotes which would curb these negative emotions, we should engage in the practices. So with regard to this, the process of development of the negative emotions, the path leading to liberation, establishing the nature. The Arya Sanghas so says that when so with regard to these negative emotions and the mental events or mental factors, we need to check within and know that the different types of mental factors. So according to a Sangha, suppose there is a multicolored or mottled kind of a robe, which is in coiled in the fashion of a snake, and there's a slight darkness falling on it. And so because of that, and one is not able to see that it is a robe, and actually, and therefore people sometimes think that there is a snake there. And so similarly, by with our biggest hour of mind, because of the ignorance which obscures our mind to see the reality of our psychophysical aggregates. What we hold on to is this that the aggregates are. We are deluded that the aggregates are the self, and therefore there is the view of transitory collections. And then because from there all the rest of the negative emotions arise. And masters Dharmakirti and Chandrakirti and so forth accept that, assert that this ignorance is the root of all other negative emotions. I mean, this kind of view of transitory aggregates is the root of all negative emotions. So when we are amongst a crowd and someone accuses us of stealing something, we feel that even though I am without any fault, this person is saying such a thing to me. And when you think like when you in the process, what we actually go through is that this self, there is the very clear apprehension of the self, or grasping at the self as being some kind of independently existent. And the next part is the development, the cause from which the negative emotions develop. And there are 6 parts to it. Deixa-se. Olha. If you look at page 461, ascertaining the nature of path leading to liberation. This has 2 sections, thinking about the source of suffering and the entry to suffering. And number 2, actually ascertaining the nature of the path leading to liberation. And then regarding the first, it has 3 subheadings: how delusions are developed, how karma is accumulated through them, and how one leaves one's rebirth at death and is conceived in another. And regarding the first, how the delusions are developed, this has 4 sections: identification of the delusion, the stages in their development, and the causes of delusions and the drawbacks of the delusions. There are 2 ways of fitting into the Lam Rim scheme: the heading, thinking about the source of suffering, the entry or to samsara. One way is to attach it to the earlier heading. The way used here, follows the traditional discourses of the swift path and easy path and puts the heading on the next, actually ascertaining the nature of the path to liberation. You should first think about the general and specific drawbacks of samsara, become moved to renounce it, and develop a wish to be liberated. You'll then wonder what is the cause of samsara. After investigating the cause and becoming acquainted with it, you'll then want to break its continuity. The origin of suffering has 2 paths: originating delusions and originating karma. You must carry the burden of the afflicted aggregates, and karma is responsible. Karma develops because of delusions. You have accumulated immeasurable karma is the past, but without the delusions of craving and clinging as an attendant subsidiary causes. So those negative emotions, which are concomitant with grasping at true existence, are said to be not grasping at the true existence of their own accords, but they are influenced by the grasping at true existence, which is the ignorance. subsidiary cause. Karma cannot on its own throw you into another rebirth. It would be like seed without moisture. Even if you have you have no accumulated karma from the past, if you have delusions, you'll immediately accumulate fresh karma because of these delusions, and so take on a set of samsaric aggregates in your next rebirth. Dharmakirti says in his commentary on valid cognition, for those beyond craving for existence, karma cannot precipitate another birth because the attendant causes have been destroyed. And also, but if one has craving, it'll happen again. The root, therefore, being reborn into samsara is delusion itself. By delusion, we mean something that through its own power and whenever we develop it, has the function of immediately making our mind stream, our personal and mental continuum, unpeaceful and unsubdued. Thus, we must identify the delusions. For not doing so would be like not identifying the poison in a deadly arrow. We will not know what antidote we need to apply. And then the identification of delusions. This has two parts, the root delusions and the secondary delusions. The root delusions from Vasubandhu's treasury of metaphysics, the 6 subtle and extensive roots of samsaric existence are attachment, anger, pride, ignorance, wrong views, and doubt. That is, there are 6 root delusions. And attachment. When we see an attractive jewel, body, food, drink, or whatever, we develop thoughts such as not wanting to be separated from it. And other delusions are like dust on a piece of cloth, easy to remove, but attachment, which means clinging to or being fixated with something, is like an oil that has soaked into a piece of cloth and difficult to remove because it spreads out further and further. So when one's parents or teachers, because of their love for us, they could develop anger when they deal with us because of our behavior. When, for example, one wants to look at an object, touch it, and so forth, craving and clinging to it, this object of one's attachment penetrates the mind. These then spread and are difficult to remove. The lasso of craving and attachment confines you to samsara's prison. In other words, because attachment is the root that prevents us from being sufficiently moved to renounce samsara, it is main thing bringing us to samsara. So His Holiness is making a difference between pride and arrogance. So we, in order to put down others, when we feel called elated or puffed up, that's arrogance. Whereas when you feel that I can do it, and it's not necessarily arrogance, but you could be that this could be pride and confidence. And bodhisattvas have that kind of confidence and pride to be thinking that they can do practices and they can engage in helping others, sentient beings. Engage in all kinds of practices, as it is said in the 8 verses of mind training. They have this strong courage and determination to work for the welfare of other sentient beings. And although in their personal practice, they also hold themselves low, as said in the 8 verses. Whenever I associate with anyone, may I look myself as the lowest and sincerely and hold others to be supreme. So regarding pride, page 464, pride is your inflated opinion of yourself and can manifest in relation to some good or bad object, your power, wealth, good, family, wisdom, your pure ethics, even your pleasant voice or physical prowess. when you look down from a high mountain, everyone below seems to have shrunken in size. When you hold yourself to be superior to others and have an inflated opinion of yourself, you take on a superior aspect. It requires only a trivial object to serve as a cause for your developing pride or arrogance. And then we are at ignorance. In Lam Rim Chemo, there are these two divisions of ignorance about causality, law of causality, and ignorance with regard to the reality as it is. It says generally ignorance is the opposite of the word to know, with the negative particle ma added, like the verbs to see and to not to see, or to know and not to know. Ignorance is not knowing, not seeing, not understanding, being unclear, and so forth, like the pitch black which we see when our eyes are shut tight, or not seeing objects in total darkness. Ignorance is the blindness of not seeing the nature of or mode of existence of things. The four truths, the cause and effect, the three jewels, and the like. Ignorance is the root of all delusions. There is one system that asserts that ignorance is the same as the view that equates the self with the perishables, that is the aggregates. And in that system, the view itself is ignorance. So with regard to those non-view negative emotions, they could be overcome through other types of antidotes, which are not necessarily intelligence or wisdom, but the views which are of the nature of intelligence. They cannot be overcome by other measures, but by wisdom, realizing the reality. So the first system was asserted by Splendid Chandrakirti, by Dharmakirti and others. The second is Sangha and his disciples, it says. And and then it goes through the other afflictive emotions of doubt, deluded views, and a view that equates the self with the perishables. And even ants, in this section, in the third paragraph, it's even ants hold this view, equating the self with the perishables. If you poke an ant on the nose with a blade of grass, it'll immediately think, terrified, something is happening to me, hunch up and play dead. Later, it'll turn around and run away. The view of equating the self is perishable, with the perishable caused it to do this. And extreme views. These views are directed towards anything grasped at by the above view of equating the self with the perishables. Extreme views take such things to be permanent, stable, independent, established as being true, and so on. Views such as regarding the continuity of the I as being discontinued at death are also extreme views. Although it is mainly non-Buddhists who hold these views, we may also wrongly regard things as being established as true, or have nihilistic views, etc. The view of holding aggregates to be supreme. This is a deluded view deriving from any of the above-mentioned wrong views, those equating the self with the perishables, or those holding things to be permanent and non-existent. The delusion is directed towards the aggregates of the holder of these views, and it takes these aggregates to be supreme. Holding an ethic or code of behavior to be supreme, this view is taking, for example, the cultivation of the 5 fires, jumping over trident, the ethic of standing on one leg, and so on, to be paths of liberation. And with regard to So His Holiness was commenting on the 400 verses, which says, which is quoted here somewhere, as just as the physical bodily faculty permeates all other faculties, sense faculties, and likewise ignorance and also permeates all other negative or destructive emotions. So which will be explained later, it's said in this text. So the stages of on page 468, the stages in their development, the six root delusions. In fact, all delusions derive fundamentally from the grasping at the self and the view of equating the self with the perishable. All suffering, all karma and delusions, therefore, derive from this view of equating self with the perishables. If you assert that this view is one with ignorance, according to the system that does not assert this, ignorance itself is the key element. According to Prasangika Madhyamaka system, the view of equating self with the perishables is the root. There are intellectual and instinctive views, and here this view is the later kind. There are two types of instinctive views, grasping at I and grasping at mine. The view of equating the self with the perishable is grasping at mine. When someone compliments you or whatever, you think, how nice of him to say that of me. This I and me are very vivid and very deep-seated within the mind, because you have these thoughts. You take them to be the self, and the notion that is self, that this self is the experiencer, arises. Because of this notion, you cling to the I, grow attached to those who help you, hate people who harm you, and have benighted ignorance towards strangers. From a commentary on valid cognition, you know people others as others because you have a self. You grasp at the pair, self and others, and become hostile. These are the completely related. All misdeeds derive from them. And in Chandrakirti is engaging in the middle way. May my mind perceive that every faulty delusion derives from views that equate the self, that equate the set of aggregates with the self. At first, I clung to the self, the I, and I developed attachment to things, and then you develop this mindness. This is mine. Although the root of the six subtle and extensive root delusions is ignorance, one develops attachment, hostility, doubt, and so forth in absence or in dependence on the view of equating the self with the perishables. And in dependence on attachment, etc., one accumulates merit. And in dependence on this karma, one cycles in samsara. The roots of samsara are ignorance, the view that equates the self with the perishable sets of aggregates, the instinctive grasping at an I. To abandon delusion for good, one must work hard at applying the antidote to ignorance and to grasping at the self, that is the wisdom that understands selflessness. This wisdom that understands selflessness is therefore like the white panacea medicine that panacea medicine that can destroy hundreds of evils. From the 400 verses, that is why all delusions are conquered when benightedness is conquered. From the sutra on the 10 stages, in this world, all misdeeds ever committed arose or to be found came from manifest clinging to self. Without manifest clinging to the self, these would not happen. All the same, And until one understands selflessness, one must employ some means to suppress delusion in order to be temporarily rid of them. One must prevent their cause. And so the causes of delusions, there are 6 regarding this. And the first cause, the foundation. This foundation consists of seeds or latencies, just as when one is unable to uproot the seeds of illness, even the smallest piece of food will provoke illness. So when one meets with a certain condition, one will readily develop delusion in one's mind stream because one has the seeds of delusion. These ready to sprout seeds are the foundation or instincts for this to happen. The second cause, the focus or object. This could be something pleasant, unpleasant, or whatever. When we meet with these things, because we have not abandoned the seeds of delusion, as Vasubandhu's Treasury of Metaphysics says, not abandoning delusion, both subtle and extensive, remaining in proximity to their subjects, and carrying out unrealistic thinking. These are the full set of causes for delusion. In other words, we must distance ourselves as far as possible from the object of delusion, since we will otherwise develop delusions. Ardent people should avoid them by living in monasteries, hermitages, and so on. It will benefit us beginners and allow us to avoid delusions. If we do not see these subjects of delusion for a while, we should therefore avoid them as much as we can. In the mind training text, we find he who still applies. So if you think well about the faults of this psychophysical, contaminated psychophysical aggregates, then you will naturally understand the faults of the negative emotions themselves as well. And Tongme Sangpo said, he who still... He who still applies antidotes should chiefly abandon these evil objects. And Tongme Sangpo said, abandon evil objects, the delusions gradually subside. From these distractions, without practices gradually increase, your virtuous practices gradually increase, your mind cleansed, you gain conviction in the Dharma. Cultivating solitude or seeking solitude is a task of a child of victorious ones. In other words, it is vital to abandon objects that develop delusions and to stay in some place congenial for this. And the third, the society. So this is the essence. As a Buddhist practitioner of Buddhism, you have to rely on the sentient beings and got independence in relation to them, develop the altruism and see the faults of the negative emotions and see them as one's sworn enemies and try to crush them. And so His Holiness was making this comment on the final paragraph of the section on the drawbacks of delusion, where it says, in other words, you must clearly see delusions as your worst enemy and apply the antidotes right away. And how karma is still accumulated. There are two types of karma, mental and intended, mental karma and intended karma. Mental karma, Compendium of Metaphysics by Asanga says, what is mental karma? It is a karmic action of the compositional factors, aggregates that makes a thought manifest. Its function is to engage the mind in virtuous and the non-virtuous or neutral. The neutral. In other words, a mental karmic action is, for example, the primary mind that provokes us to feel we should speak insulting words, or it is a karmic action of the secondary mind that provokes or encourages us while we are saying these insulting words. An intended karma in the Lam Rim, the other text that we in general, you will not meet with the results of the karma that you have not created, and then the karma does not go to waste. But because of our the blood relationship, if children do something virtuous, the parents are helped. And then if you're living in one family and the rest of the family, if someone in the family dies and the rest of the family does something good, a virtuous practice, that also helps because they are bound together by their wealth. So because of this kind of connection between the Lama and disciples, the virtuous practices of the one could help the other. An intended karma, this consists of actions of the body and speech motivated by mental karma. As a treasury of metaphysics says, karma, it is mental or created by the mind. Mental karma is mental action. It gives rise to karmic actions of the body. So we'll leave here. Just before how to leave one rebirth and death and are reconceived in another on page 476. So Lam Rim dedication prayer from my two collections, vast a space that I have amassed from working with effort at this practice for a great length of time. May I become the chief leading Buddha for all those whose minds' wisdom eye is blinded by ignorance. Even if I do not reach this state, may I be held in your loving compassion for all lives, Manjushri. May I find the best of complete graded parts of the teachings, and may I please all the Buddhas by my practice. Oh, sorry, this is the mandala offering. In the land surrounded by snow mountains, the source of all good and happiness is you. Chandrasek in person, Tenzin Gyatso. May you live until the end of samsara. Westerners, please do not bring your mobile phones with you in the teaching venue. I've been asked to make this announcement urgently, and it's very important that you do not bring your mobile phones unless, because you are not allowed to bring it, and it causes tension between the security people at the gates and you. If you bring your mobile phones to the teaching venue, please avoid bringing your phones. From the two collections, vastest space I have amassed, from working with great effort at this practice for a great length of time, may I become the chief leading Buddha for all whose mind's wisdom eyes are blinded by ignorance. Even if I do not reach this state, may I be held in your loving compassion for all lives, Manjushri. May I find the best of complete graded paths of this teaching, and may I please all the Buddhas by my practice. Using skillful means drawn by the strong force of compassion, may I clear the darkness from the minds of all beings with the points of the path as I have discerned them. May I uphold Buddha's teaching for a very long time. With my heart going out with great compassion, in whatever direction the most precious teachings have not yet spread, or once spread but declined, may I reveal this treasure of happiness and aid. May the minds of those who wished for liberation be granted bounteous peace, and the Buddha's deeds be nourished for a long time. By even this graded path to enlightenment completed due to the wondrous virtuous conduct of the Buddhas and their offsprings, may all human and non-human beings who eliminate adversity and create conducive conditions for practicing the excellent paths never be parted in any of their lives from the purest path praised by the Buddhas. Whenever someone makes effort to act in accordance with the tenfold Mahayana virtuous practices, may they always be assisted by the mighty ones, and may oceans of prosperity spread everywhere. So for all the Westerners and Chinese or other people, I've been asked to make this announcement rather forcefully to please do not bring your mobile phones to the teaching venue. If you are coming inside, passing through the gate, because it causes tension between you and the people at the gate who are supposed to check your pass and whether you have passes or to enter the teaching venue or not. And so please bear this in mind, and from tomorrow do not bring your mobile phones, although you are allowed to take with you to the teaching venue your tablets and also the iPads. You are not allowed to bring your mobile phones. This is also because of security reasons. This has been prohibited. Bringing or allowing the mobile phones are prohibited. So please keep this in mind, and if you know other people who are not listening now, give this message around so that everybody is aware not to bring their mobile phones to the teaching venue. se che mi dai mi gu te ra bai gu do ye ve nga bai naman tha raman tha je wa ma yuru je te te ba cho lai chu. Whenever someone makes effort to act in accordance with the tenfold Mahayana virtuous practices, may they always be assisted by the mighty ones, and may oceans of prosperity spread everywhere. May the operations of evil thoughts and deeds of negative forces, humans and non-humans, who harbor malice through their perverted prayers against the teaching of the victorious one, be totally vanquished through the power of the truth of the three jewels. Please do not bring your mobile phones from tomorrow to the teaching venue. It's prohibited, and you'll face difficulties and problems with the security people. Thank you.
Sure.